Maya Ben David, the Israel Science Foundation that supported the production of the film or the virtual tour, which I also enjoyed, but maybe another one, especially for the conference, the participants from abroad and from Israel, the guests from near and far, and last but not least, the organizers, Daniela and Yoni. I wish you all a great evening, and in the spirit of times, a safe walk back to the comfort of your living room, kitchen, or garden. And I hope that soon enough, Zoom conferences will become the exception, and we can again meet in person and not over screen. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Wettstein, the Dean of the Faculty of Humanities and Social Sciences at Ben-Gurion University.
So I'm going to introduce our speaker for what we're going to do in the final session. We'll have Professor Frenkel will speak for like 20 minutes. We'll have perhaps a Q&A for like just 5 minutes, a pretty short one. We'll have some concluding remarks, and then we'll open the floor to discussion for concluding our, I think, successful workshop. So let me just introduce quickly Professor Frenkel. Yehoshua Frenkel is Emeritus Professor from the University of Haifa. He studies the social history of the Central Arabic lands in the Middle Islamic period. He's well known. His recent publications, among a lot of publications, include Slavery in 17th Century Ottoman Jerusalem in light of several Sharia court records, in this volume on slaves and slave agency in the Ottoman Empire. This great article, Mamluk Soundscape, a chapter in sensory history. Ali, you're probably familiar with that. And a concise history of Islamic Egypt in Miriam Frenkel as editor, The Jews in Medieval Egypt, from 2021, just published. And I'll just mention that I think we spoke, you were at my first conference, academic conference, which I spoke in as an MA student. It was in Ilma in 20, I can't even know, I think it was 2007 probably, or 8. We spoke in the same panel, so it's a double pleasure for me to introduce you, of course. And the floor is yours. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you. So to meet time restriction and to keep the audience attention at the last round of this conference, long 4 days actually, I will limit my contribution to and skip several topics that will be included in the final paper that I wrote. Following the introductory notes, I will examine mosque lamps, Incantation Balls, and Futuba Trousers. But first, several words about the Mamluk Sultanate and Islam. The Islamic Ummah in the lands of the Mamluk Sultanate and individual Muslims were governed by an elaborated Islamic law that is rooted in several Quranic verses and prophetic maxima or maxims, to which local practices and folk traditions were added. The Sharia directs Muslims' doctrine, the Aqidah, and the duties, the Faraid, both individual and communal, and as well as the rituals. Yeah. According to the political vision of Mamluk jurists, the Sultan's duties included the welfare, the maslaha of the Muslims, and the protection of the believers. And indeed, sultans and army officers who served the Sultanate invested considerable sums of money and energy to achieve these imperatives. The Mamluk military aristocracy financed enormous efforts to magnify the memory of the Prophet Muhammad and to expand the power of the religious establishment. The distribution of the Dashisha, a dish made of crushed wheat and fat, is a case in point. It was distributed in Medina and in Hebron. The local rituals in the lands of the Mamluk Sultanate can be compared to the universal ahistorical written texts that were produced by jurists and comparison that illuminate the historical and the comparison of that text with the local tradition actually illuminate the historical particularity of the Sultanate. Bearing in mind the particular socio-political and historical context, a working methodology that integrates literary sources and archaeological findings would also support efforts to delineate the idiosyncrasy. Material objects made of metal, wood, and stone are promising source for gaining new historical insight into the socio-political ideal that was outlined above. A careful investigation of these objects suggests innovative directions. Coins and glass stamps, for example, provide data on the emergence of the Islamic Caliphate prior to the earliest narrative sources in Arabic. Hence, I will refrain from speaking about dichotomy between high culture and folk culture, or about scriptural puritanical Islam versus oral popular ritualistic Islam, what is tagged in the sources as bid'ah. This value-based approach should be given up in favor of a contextualized historical approach, as was said already, and the study of ritual objects supports such a research agenda. So let us examine several artifacts that illuminate my working method, test de travail, my working method, and support my arguments. In the written paper, there is a long piece on the mosque and the hammam, and but I will skip it and I will go to several mosque equipment. By marking the landscape, mosques that are a sacred space established spatial boundaries. Mosques are almost void of any furniture. No benches, desks, or stands serve the worshippers. No decorative objects are requested to perform the services. That saying so, I'm not reflecting on the aesthetics of the mosque. Yeah, as we know, there are paintings, at least of flora on the walls, and there are the carpets. So it's not my argument regarding the aesthetics. Close to, now, if you are looking into the mosque, so close to the mihrab is the pulpit, the minbar, and next to them are the boxes of the Quran, or containers of the Qurans, the rab'a. They were made from various materials, including silk, and the sacred box was ornamented with silver, as was also the book. The Quran itself was ornamented with a play of colors and size of letters, and sometimes there are flowers and so on and so forth. A Quran box in the Islamic Art Museum in Cairo is decorated with Ayat al-Kursi, the throne verse, or in Quran Surah al-Baqarah, Surah 2, verse 255, that actually is very much used against Christians because it speaks about God who is not begotten and he's not and doesn't have a child. Lam yalad v'lam yulad. To hold monumental Qurans, embellished stand, the kursi, made from wood and decorated with ivory inlay, stood near the Quran, the boxes that contained the Quran.
Yehoshua, my apologies. Were you planning on presenting and showing the sites, the screen?
That I don't.
No. Okay.
Okay. Yeah.
Just let us know when. Okay.
Okay. Some masterpieces of Mamluk strengths are decorated by inscribed lines that list the most beautiful names of Allah, Asma al-Husna. Radiating inscription on a Quran box made for Nasir Muhammad intended to legitimize his rule. And it bears the verse from the Quran, from Surah 3:26, say, O God, Master of Kingdom, thou gives the kingdom to whom thou wilt. Well, the translation is taken from Arabic. It's not my English. Most builders were expected to provide them with lightning, tanwir, and indeed the new construction were often adorned with glass lamps. And we saw last evening, Ayala brought several from the Metropolitan, several slides from the, can I say slides in Zoom? Yeah, or it's contradiction, from the Metropolitan, yeah, Carboni and White House, what's the name? And indeed, the new constructions were often adorned with glass lamps. Regularly, an endowment that financed the building of a mosque also paid for the oil. Actually, most Mamluk period lamps that have reached us were produced to illuminate religious construction, namely mosques and madrasas. Some of these lamps bear, in addition to the patron's name, also a verse from the Quran. And here, Yoni, can I upload my PowerPoint?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
You can do the share screen and the green.
Can you see it?
Not yet.
No. So how I'm doing it?
You have the green small green share screen thing. You're co-host, so you don't see. I don't know. It's a green thing that says share screen, and you press it. Yep, you got it. That thing. Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you. Perfect.
Okay. So that is the ayah that I mentioned, and so we have this ayah that also was mentioned during the talk, during the last presentations. And the Ayat al-Nur, the verse that speak about God, that is the light. Yeah, God is the light of heavens and so on and so forth. I will not read it. You can see it. Undoubtedly, the engraving of this verse of Ayat al-Nur reflects the popular belief in the symbolic feature of light and in its function in religious rituals. And about it, several scholars already wrote, starting from the Uri Rubin that was mentioned here and ending with Robert Hillenbrand, to mention only a couple of names. The function of light in several mid-month event like Laylat Nisaf Shaban also support the assumption that light had a function in religious festivals and rituals. So we have, and the number of these lamps is huge, and I think that the greatest number of them were produced during the period of the sons of Kalaun, and especially of Nasir Muhammad ibn Kalaun and Ibn Kalaun and his heirs. So and these lamps, as I said, have a function. Certainly, they're functional in the ritual, not only by helping the believers to find their way at the mosque, but also reading these verses from Quran, yeah, or the verse like in Surah from Surah 24 that says in temples of God has allowed to be raised up, and His name be commemorated there. several of the surviving lamps bear, in addition to Ayat Nur that I mentioned earlier, the sentence "Glory to our Lord," and there is a list of this Lord, Izli Maulana, or Nasarahu Allah, and so on and so forth. There are numerous examples to it. So now moving from the mosque to the more private space, I would refer here to Incantation Balls. So, yeah, this is taken from a Viet catalog of the Viet catalog from Cairo about the bronze instrument in the museum in Cairo. Fear of health hazards drove Mamluk period Muslims to use incantation balls, Taza Mubaraka, and it's quite related to the previous session before the tour, where Gidi Bohak and Abigail spoke about the magic balls. These decorated artifacts served to calm down anxieties. Inscriptions that were engraved on the deep rounded sides of these balls reflect the owner's emotional stress. Indeed, these balls cannot be described as ritual objects in the narrow sense, but since the use of them reflects the world vision of the Mamluk, of the Muslim believers in the Mamluk period, there is room to include them in the present paper. These magic balls contain users' instruction and sometimes were decorated with Quranic verses. Those who drank from them hoped to be cured and from a wide range of common maladies and obtain the blessing, the barakah. So just to get the impression of this incantation balls, you can see this. From two balls, I brought this. I translated this. The inscriptions or the engravement that the inscription that's engraved on the deep side of the ball, and you can see all the health risks that were from rabies to mother that cannot give milk to her, and so on and so forth. And actually, these balls can be seen even in 19th and early 20th century. Now, moving from the balls, I will go further to textiles and to historical objects. Now, several relics that were associated with the Prophet Muhammad were believed to be stored in Mamluk Cairo, and the work by Imam Abdul Fattah was mentioned yesterday. A list of these items, based upon medieval sources, contain reference to Muhammad's ball, to his bronze stick, to clip. Almost every item that one can imagine is named in this list. From Ibn Taymiyyah's writing, we can deduce that relics that were associated with the Prophet occupied the Muslims' mind during his days. So now from this objects, I will only mention here the shoe of the Prophet that was already mentioned by Professor Lawrence Coran yesterday. This is a model of the shoe taken from a manuscript that is preserved at the Israeli National Library the text is from the Ottoman period, but it is based on Mamluk and even Ayyubid period writings. Sirajuddin Bulkini, who lived in the 15th century, and Ibn Asakir, Abu Yuman, Ibn Asakir, who lived actually at the end of the Ayyubid period. They wrote about the shoe of the Prophet, and the shoe of the Prophet was believed to be in the Madrasa al-Ashrafiyya in Damascus, till the evil Tamerlan came and then it disappeared. Now, there were other. Now I will move from this with relics to textile objects, and I will mention here the Futuba trousers. Daphna mentioned the khirka yesterday, but during the Mamluk period, it was common among Sufis to be dressed with these trousers, the Futuba trousers. Now, the history, according to the sources, the history of these trousers goes back to the days of the Abbasid Caliph Nasir al-Din Allah, who is credited as a leading pioneer in the dissemination of the ideal of an Islamic brotherhood. Young men, fityan, and from this comes the word futuba, who were encouraged by the Caliph to join the tariqa, were persuaded to wear a distinctive kind of trousers that is called futuba trousers, and we have a description of these trousers taken from the writings of the Subki, Tajuddin, who was a very influential leading scholar and jurist in 14th century Damascus. And he provides us with a description of the trousers and the ceremony that is related to these trousers. And as you can read from the screen, I will to economize the time, the use of time, I will skip the reading it. I just will mention it, the fact that Muslim scholars like Ibn Taymiyyah, who was already mentioned, regarded this ceremony and this drinking from the bowl as an innovation, as a bid'ah, and he says, Ibn Taymiyyah says in a response, a group that assembles in session during this gathering, they dress one of the participants with futuba libas, a dress. They circulate among the partakers a drink made up from salt water and from sweet water. They claim that this beverage is a religious duty. They state this statement is unacceptable and quite often follows Ibn Taymiyyah actually accuse this Futuba groups as sodomy and so on and so forth. So I showed here several would say artifacts and social practices related with them, and I will conclude by saying that this short contribution analyzed textual and material sources that cast light on sacred spaces and artifacts. They serve as a loci and objects of rituals. Employing this hybrid working thesis support our effort to gain additional historical insight. Future studies would support this research methodology. Thank you.
Thank you very much. You can stop share.
Yeah.
So we have a couple of minutes for questions, if anyone wants to ask or inquire, comment. Yes, Ali.
Thank you so much, Professor, and thank you for sending me the article on Mamluk soundscapes as well throughout the in the middle of the conference. I really did appreciate that. I was struck by the 15th Shaban lighting ritual that you spoke about. Is that specifically just a Mamluk centered ritual, or did it happen during the Fatimid period and before in the Abbasid period at all? I know about it happening later, but I just was wondering if you could elaborate a little bit more on the 15th period.
I believe that Kister mentioned already Ayyubid. Kister wrote a long article about. Actually, he wrote 3 articles about each of these months: Ramadan, Shaban, and Rajab. The order is not chronology. My chronology is not. Anyhow, I believe that it was already during the Ayyubid period that this practice was, or this night. If I'm not wrong, also Daniela wrote something about it. No, yeah. Daniela,
Yes.
can you?
Yes, but Yehoshua, can you stop the sharing the screen so we can see each other?
Ah. What are you looking for?
No, it's you. You need to do that.
The green thing. Just stop on the share screen green. Press stop share. I think I can stop it. Let me try.
What I did wrong? Something went wrong. Yeah.
I think Yehoshua can do it. Okay.
No.
Now you can see me
I
now.
got it. Okay.
No, good.
Okay.
Okay.
Langsam, aber sicher. Yeah. Okay. So Daniela, can you add something about this Shaban night, please?
It's definitely it's pre-Mamluk, and so is Rajab, the night of El Gharaib, which I mentioned, the first Thursday night of the month of Rajab, which was celebrated in public in the Fatimid period, with banquets, and there was a lot going on in the Fatimid era, and then under the Ayyubids and Mamluks. And the lighting of mosques is repeatedly described when those rituals are mentioned. Often, as I said, in critique of this gatherings, which in the eyes of some scholars were innovations and an opportunity for unruly behavior and gatherings of men and women together, etc.
Thank you.
I think Nick, you have a question, comment?
Thank you. I have a question about the Futuba ritual and the Futuba Trousers ritual and the basins you were showing. In my talk, I very briefly mentioned these 3 basins, 2 of which are in the Louvre, which are they are Mamluk basins, but they have been come into the possession of the Lusignan dynasty and have the Lusignan arms on them. And I hadn't heard before about this potential, with the connection of basins like this to these, well, what might be called chivalric rituals. So I'm just curious about whether there is anything that might transmit across confessional lines about these sorts of coming of age rituals and how they might pass with the basins. Is that something you know anything about?
No, I did. Well, now Sharwal or Sarwal, the only one that the Mamluk Sarwal that I'm familiar with is kept in Brussels. in the textile museum or textile wing of the Belgian museum, National Museum. I can't recall any transformation of this practice.
It certainly sheds a lot of light potentially on why these basins in particular might have been desirable objects at European courts.
Yeah, okay. There are textiles. There are
no, the basins.
So the basins for shrink. Yeah, it was a high quality production. I mean, certainly it was fine art, and it's very impressive still nowadays. If you are going to the Louvre or to any museum that, or even in Cairo, it's a bit difficult to be impressed because the conditions of the museum are not so encouraging visiting. I would say it's like to go into a storage rather than to a museum. But
I was just curious because the ritual you described, right, is I know Deborah Torr has written about the potential sort of resonances between Futuba culture and chivalry, European chivalry. Yeah. And this particular one of the trousers and belting obviously has a lot of potential resonance with knighting ceremonies. So I mean the presence of those basins and the as you say, you know, the potential resonance with the ritual makes a lot more sense of this transmission of the object.
Yeah, well, from the Crusader period, we know that it was not only a period of war, but there were friendly relations between the fighting forces from both sides. I mean, so there is no doubt. I believe that they learned or I would say took ideas from the other side. Yeah, because they traveled, they shared. There is this story about crusade knights that are buying a leopard, believing that they are buying a cheetah for hunting and so on. So there was some communication between the sides, but the influence. It's very tricky. I mean, it's very tricky question. It's and the soil is not so stable. I mean, it's very easy to believe that they copied, and I don't believe that this is the word we should. Yeah, there was some certainly there was some influence.
Thank you.
So I think we should move to concluding remarks, Daniela. I think it's time.
Hagit.
Sorry, Hagit.
Oh,
yeah.
sorry, Hagit, go ahead.
From Hamburg, far away.
Just a quick, can you say something more about the expenses of the oil? I found it very, very interesting.
Yeah, okay, so the Waqf, and especially the late Waqfs, would pay for the daily functioning or daily operation in the mosque. They will pay for a chanter or for a muazzin, the man who calls to prayer, and they will pay for cleaning the mosque. This will be an item in the Waqf, in the endowment document, and they will also pay for the oil that was used in the mosque to enlighten the mosque. Yeah. So it's certainly 15th century Waqf documentation share a lot of data on this. I would say regular practice or operation mode. Yeah.
But did anybody make a specific research on this? Like, making some calculations of how big was the mosque or how much light was really in or something like this?
I can't, I mean, the Waqfiyat that were studied, yeah, NRC studied, but I can't recall that somebody made the only guide that guide's not the right word. The only professor that I can believe that did it was Ashtor in his work about prices and salaries, and perhaps also Maya Schatzmiller, who she also wrote about prices and salaries, and so in this I will go start with their work, Ashtor and Schatzmiller.
Thank you.
Perhaps also Goitain has something about comparable about synagogues. I'm not sure, but he also dealt with themes like that.
Okay, should we move on, Daniela? Yeah, any more questions or comments? Thank you, Yehoshua. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Oh, Ayala, do you want to comment or say something?
Yes, I think that one conclusion we learned from the conference, that actually there are very few artifacts within Islamic culture that bear for the private person and the public that have a sacred meaning. I mean, we have, of course, the Quran, we have the prayer rug, we have the mosque lamp, and lately we have also the prayer chains for the Asma al-Husna, but we don't have any more. I mean, and this is something that if you think about the conference, you could very well understand.
I beg to differ, Ayala. I think the Islamic tradition also has relics, even though we were sort of used to believe that relics is a Christian matter. There's a developed cult of relics in Islam as well. Relics of the Prophet, relics of saints, garments of saints, as Daphna has mentioned.
Written word, but not of object. Okay?
We can't hear you so much.
I mean, I agree with you, but that of these objects of the prophet and so on, they are the written words, but they are not objects themselves. The written word tend to be an amulet, okay?
Not necessarily. There are copies of sandals all over in different, kept in different places. And if we want bodily relics, there are hairs. There are containers with the Prophet's saliva. There are actually objects, I would say.
Something like something that everyone probably wear on his neck, and something like this. This is all things that are connected with institutions and so on.
I couldn't hear.
I mean, I want to say that those, whatever you mean, Daniela, it is connected institutionally. I mean, it belongs to institutions and not to the private person. Okay?
I think if I could add, sorry, I know that Yoni, you want to go on with the conclusion, but if we just look at the realm of textiles, for instance, textiles, and I can speak of this specifically in the Fatimid context, that textiles, there were two types of textiles. So the word khil'a specifically means that it's kind of handed down. It's a hand-me-down, basically, right? That becomes institutionalized, as you're saying, that there's official state textiles that are used for several purposes. But the reason that we have so many Fatimid textiles in museum collections around the world, and the reason that they're in fragments, is because we found them in so many burial sites. And so people chose to choose these specific textiles to be wrapped around their heads, around their faces when they were buried, whether they were even Coptic or Muslim. And so when we look back to sort of understand why people were being buried with state textiles, it's in the Fatimid contexts, which I can specifically speak for, is that people, the idea, and this is looking at a micro lens inside the court, is that the imam or the caliph was considered a spiritual person as well as a temporal leader. So people would see him in two different ways. But the textile being given to the person had a transference of, so people really basically held the textile as like a relic, as an object of a specific value, which they kept long enough and valued long and revered long enough to be buried with. So in the case of the eunuch that I did my dissertation on, he basically gets hand-me-downs of actual clothing. So he gets a shirt, he gets the pants, at the end of his life from the current caliph that was sort of hand-me-downs from previous caliphs as a sign of barakah, number one, and a sign of shifa, basically to give him sort of cure the illness that he's in. So in that way, textiles is a perfect example of how these things were kept, preserved, and revered throughout. I mean, if we think of that as sort of an object, if we're not thinking about buildings and other things, right? Because obviously holy water, the idea of Zamzam, the ideas of wells in North Africa being attached to Zamzam, we can go on.
Private artifacts, not the buildings.
And that's why I brought up textiles, yeah, specifically.
Oh, so trees.
Maybe I can add something, because I was thinking about the Shia Islam and the performance of the Ashura and all the theater. No, it's not theater, it's performance. And I wonder actually whether the objects they use, I think they do have also a religious function. I have not much idea about it, but I think there's much to explore about that as well.
Sarah, I think you know something about Shi and Sufi objects.
Unmute. Yes, definitely. I mean, we can say it's always a bit tricky because I'm not so familiar with the early medieval period or medieval period, and I haven't looked into the medieval material so much, but I can say that up to today, from the, well, let's say 17th century until today, you have a vast amount of Shia material, which definitely has a ritual, is used in these are all ritual objects and used until today. I'm talking specifically now about sites in the subcontinent, but it's, throughout the shared world. So, I mean, I think there's a vast amount of ritual objects, material, culture in Islam.
I can say that they used the books like a talisman while they went to the battle. They used to swear in Al-Sakhawi, Sahih al-Bukhari, and the book of Qadi Iyad, Al-Shifa, as a talisman. That's what I know. I don't know how they use it, but they say when you want to go to the battle, take this book and it will help you. Or if you'll be in a boat, take this book with you and the boat will never sink. Oh, that's what I read. That's what I know.
I think people still do that today.
Could I pose one question to all of you? Because we were talking about the Ayat Nur so many times, about the light, and I wondered always about the olive tree. What about the olive tree and the oil used for the lamps? Is there any connection, or is there anything in the sources talking about it, or in terms of using certain oil in the mosques or something? Anybody know something?
At least I'm not sure. Maybe others understood, but I'm not. I didn't quite understand your question.
So in the Ayat Nur, it says God is like a light, and the light is in a niche, and the oil comes from a blessed tree, from an olive tree. So is there any connection about between the oil used in lamps for ritual purposes and olive trees, for example, or is there any specific I don't know, ritual concerning the olive tree, because it's supposed a blessed tree?
Yeah. But let's say in the warm part of the Islamic world, like Egypt, like southern Morocco, you don't have olive trees. So you have in Morocco argan, or in Egypt sesame, but not olive oil. So I didn't see any reference to the specific reference to the use of or the connection between the tree and the mishka, the niche with the lamp. Yeah.
Sorry, just to add a little bit of context. Yoni, I know you need, sorry, if you need to start, let me know. Okay, just to add a little bit of context to that. What's interesting, and this is just that the first lamp that's recorded in early text, because I think in the early text they said the Prophet and the early Medinans they lighted the Prophet's mosque originally with braziers, and they used to burn palm leaves. Specifically, they talk about palm leaves. Then it's a convert, a Christian convert from Jerusalem who comes to Medina and introduces the first lamp to the Prophet, and then that sort of becomes the first sort of use of lighting the lamp with an oil lamp. So there's no mention of the olive tree in there, but I wonder if one could make that leap that you know, that the first oil lamp, at least in this, I think it's 11th century source that talks about this, of the first occurrence of a lamp in Islam, happens to be somebody from Jerusalem, which was an interesting part of my talk, which was already over time that I took out. But anyways, just throwing that in there. But it doesn't help with the symbolism question that you're asking.
Does anyone else want to raise any general question or specific question? If not at the moment, yeah, people are tired after 4 afternoons. I'd like to raise, even though not conclude, the issue of a publication, of a possible publication of the discussions of this workshop. And you know, we'd like to know, if not at this moment, in correspondence, if people would be willing to send their papers, to like rewrite their papers for publication, and where. You know, ideally, I was thinking of a volume of the Journal of Material Religion, which I know some of you know and have published in. Maybe some of you know the editors, or perhaps a journal like Entangled Religions or Religious Encounters may also be a good place for a collected for a collection of at least some of the papers, because I really feel like we had a very nice, interesting bunch of papers that group nicely, not necessarily the way we divided them into sessions, even though I think it worked, but they can be also divided in other ways. And there were so many dialogues between our different subjects and methodologies and questions that I think we can come up with a nice collection. So if anyone has an input and with either a suggestion of where we could perhaps try for, if it is of interest at the moment.
I just want to say that you have a volume structure made, because the division, you grouped it so nicely together. This is amazing in my mind. So you have the structure. What you need, of course, is a very general introduction that will tie everything together and will provide the framework, also the methodological, the conceptual, etc. And I think also that the first option you mentioned is the best. I mean, it's perfect for such a journal, I think.
Thanks.
William?
Hi, yeah, just a comment on material religion, having edited a special issue for them myself. I think it would be a great avenue to explore, but not least because, if my memory serves correctly, they will allow lots of color images to support the individual contributions. There is a but though, and the but is that if my memory serves correctly, they have a very hard word limit of 40,000 words for a special issue. And clearly that won't accommodate everybody here, but maybe, I mean, it might well be that not everybody here can contribute, but so maybe that would be one avenue for some of the papers, but maybe another for another. But just a comment from experience.
Thanks. Do you happen to know the editors?
Yeah, I can certainly make an introduction for you. Yeah,
that may help.
The workshop that we ran for my project back in 2016, that Nick and Anne were part of as well. We had one of the editors come to the workshop for the duration. So I think they would be very receptive to another sort of volume of medieval focused papers.
Anyone else on this point?
So perhaps we'll just send an email around and have, see personal responses without public shame or.
Exactly. Yeah.
Without putting everyone in the spot, right?
Yes.
So that's the most effective way of doing things in academia, I think.
Definitely. Okay, Yoni, so if you allow me, I'll say, Sarah?
Yeah, I just remembered something about oil from lamps. It's in a Christian context in Thessaloniki, the cult of Saint Demetrios, and there the oil, I think it's called myla or something like that, that was collected in little phials and is still today very valued. But that started, I think, in the 13th century or so. So that's it's not an olive tree, but it's connected to a cult of the saints, and I think that's a special cult. Which is shared, by the way, at least until the beginning of the century, it was shared by Christians and by Muslims. So that's a nice touch. And the Muslims were also keen on the oil. But not only oil, they also took earth from the sarcophagus and things like that. So various bits and pieces were taken from the site, from the sacred site. I just remembered, so small answer to a big question about the olive tree.
Stephanie, Yoni, if you don't mind, I'll give the. I just realized that Stephanie raised her hand. Please.
So it's just a pure speculation, but I think it's such a great question, this issue of the olive tree. And one thing that occurred to me is, isn't olive oil required as a kind of sacred substance for anointing within Judaism and Christianity? I wonder if there's a linkage there. I have no idea.
I think that in our part of the world, it's definitely olive oil. That was
right. But I'm just wondering if the kind of already present sacred associations of olive oil with acts of anointing and things of that nature meant that it was borrowing from that sense of holiness as a sacred substance.
Probably also because of the high quality of olive oil.
Certainly, yeah, certainly that as well. That would be a more practical consideration. Yeah, just a thought, just a query.
I just remember a book by, well, what's his name? Yahya, no, Tov, what's his name? The Lamp of Hashim, Qandil Hashim. Maybe somebody remembers. It's an early 20th century novel by an Egyptian author describing the healing of eye sicknesses in the Zainab Mosque in Cairo, whereas then somebody travels to Europe, studies medicine, is coming back and wants to fight this kind of superstition, but he doesn't manage. And that's, I think it's very interesting in terms of practices and oil, but I don't know which kind of oil they used.
I just to add to that, just linguistically, now that Stephanie mentioned, I just wonder also, is like zait is the word for oil, lamp oil, and I wonder if zait and zaytun obviously have to be related, if that's the derivative of what was the main linguistically based use of oil in the. But now this is such a good question that I think it merits a paper of its own. But I mean, very thought provocative. Thank you, everybody.
Ali, speaking about linguistic, the word for siraj is Aramaic, and the word for fanar is Greek.
Oh, wow.
It's I mean, it's a question why there is not an original name for a torch or a lamp.
Right. I sometimes answer this question by, I remember my British family used to call vacuum cleaners hoovers. And I think Italians call a special bus like a Fiat or something. So I always wonder if material culture always borrows linguistically from the high culture, or not the high culture, but the technologically producing culture of the time period. I wonder if, and I've always wondered if the same, I'm not a linguist per se in Arabic to that specialty where I can trace it back to Aramaic and all of this stuff. But I've always just generally wondered if that's the case of these, that for technology, at least, material culture always goes to the and that's why we have so many names for palace names that are not in Arabic, but like Dehliz, Iwan, and all of these things we use from Persian rather than Arabic created words for them. But just that was my thought to respond. But,
it's wonderful that people still have the energy to discuss such scholarly questions at this time of the day. And
because you made such a wonderful conference.
Thanks. This time of the day here in Israel, and really
dark
after 4 days. But I think after it is time to wrap it up, and I'll do it very, very shortly. Saying that I'm very grateful to you all. First of all, to my partner, Yoni, with whom it was really a pleasure to do things together. It is a pleasure to do things together. And to all you participants, I went back to the things we prepared for the opening session, and I can really like tick every box every theme I've mentioned. I think we really did it all. We talked about the origins of objects, the processes of their manufacture, the alteration objects that go through alterations and appropriations and adjustments by different users. We talked about the plurality of meaning and functions of objects. We talked about knowledge that circulates with objects as they move from place to place and through time. We talked about the means and possible significance or insignificance of the authentication of objects. We talked about the ways objects reflect devotional sensibilities and shape devotional sensibilities. And we talked quite a lot about how religion works in the lives of adherents in societies, even those that, the people who hardly left traces in textual written sources, definitely not in the high learned sources, and have left us traces of their lives in their artifacts they manufactured, in the way in their imprints on those manufactures, on those artifacts. And we really found out, we had ample examples of objects that over time took forms and meanings that could have never been imagined at the outset. And so documenting not only the period of their production, but also much later periods. And we explored the relationship between artifacts and ideas and sensual and aesthetic and religious experiences and traffic and commodities. And really it was extremely rich, and each and every session. And I'm really happy that it turned out so well. I hope you agree. And last but not least, despite the unfortunate lack of coffee and drinks and dinners and bus rides together, I'm glad we had sort of tours together, and really it was for me at least an extremely pleasant get together, and it's not it's not obvious doing it on Zoom rather than face to face. So again, thanks very much. And hopefully we will continue this discussion and produce something in writing, if most people will be willing to do that. Yoni, Yoni has prepared a beautiful anecdote to end our, right, Yoni? There's a few things you wanted to say, and a nice anecdote about an object we never mentioned those 4 days. So maybe you'd like to. I can't hear. You're muted.
Yeah, I was muted. I couldn't hear you for some reason. Me too. Yeah, I don't know. Very strange. Can you hear? Can you hear me?
Yes.
No? Oh, okay. So thank you very much. So I had this job of summing up the conference, the workshop, and so first I wanted to begin by thanking you for these amazing 4 days and for your inspiring and intellectually stimulating contributions, and especially to Daniela, who generously offered me to join in organizing this fabulous event and has tolerated me throughout its organization. It has been a real pleasure, and I personally have learned a lot from you all. It's difficult to wrap up such a rich series of presentations, so I thought it might be best to do simply what we historians do best, which is sharing stories from our sources, right? So my source, and I'll do it very briefly, don't worry, it's not going to be a long period. My source is a refutation of reincarnation, of the Buddhist reincarnation, by an individual named Rashid al-Din. He was a Persian vizier in the Mongol court in Iran in the 14th century. And he tells us about a conversation he had with the 14th century Mongol ruler of Iran at the time, Uljeto. I should mention that just briefly that Uljeto was somewhat of a serial converter. He was baptized as a Christian in his childhood. He practiced Buddhism. He converted to Sunni Islam and then changed from the Hanafi to the Shafi schools. He then converted to Shiism, and he possibly might have returned to Sufism prior to his death. Clearly, he himself had a great interest in religions and in their comparative aspects as well. So according to the story by the Vizier Rashid ad-Din, Uljeto had asked him about a conversation about the Sharira. The Sharira are small, or Sharin, are small jewel-like indestructible relics found after the cremation of the Buddhist sages. And I'll show you a picture just to kind of, let's see. I guess you can see that, right? So these are small, you see them on the side to the right. A small jewel-like indestructible relics found after the cremation of Buddhist sages. Uljeto's father, so the Mongol king's father, the King Arun, who was a very kind of serious Buddhist advocate, was an avid collector of Buddhist relics. And this is what Rashid ad-Din tells us, and other karma amplifiers. Uljeto had experimented himself with his father's collection, finding that they were indeed these objects, as the Buddhists claimed, indestructible. So Uljeto poses this following question to the Vizier: why is it that bodies of Muslims, the Muslim dead, do not produce similar remarkable relics? I think it's a reasonable question, right? So Rashid ad-Din's answer is quite interesting. He says 4 things. First, he writes, we the Muslims do not cremate our dead. Had we done so, one would find in their ashes something far better and greater than these relics. Second, the Sharira is not a sacred relic, but divine warning that our bodies will also serve us in the thereafter, the resurrection. So you should not, of course, mutilate or harm them. The author also offers a rational explanation. He says the Buddhist relics are not relics at all, are simply something created from the friction and the heat of the fire. So there's no mystery here. And finally, you can notice that these answers are not kind of mutually exclusive so much, are kind of exclusive a little bit. They don't work together that well. Finally, he says the Buddhist sages, we are told, might leave after them some kind of tiny pea-sized relics, as he calls them. But the Muslim saints, their bodies are in fact fully fireproof. Sufi masters consume and walk on fire without harming a single hair on their body. And the Prophet Abraham, remained unscathed when he was thrown into the fire by the tyrant Namrud, a fire that was fiercer, according to Rashid ad-Din, than the fires of hell. And the picture you have here is from Rashid ad-Din's own lifetime, from his history. It was illustrated in his workshop. You see Abraham sitting in the fire, like in Eden, in a garden, while you can see the trebuchet next to him. It's a really interesting kind of picture in that context. So I thought about this anecdote while listening to the amazing papers for the past 4 days. First, for a most obvious reason that would not surprise anyone in this audience, that while we've been comparing notes about between medieval religions, religious practices, and across religious and cultural settings, our medieval subjects were doing somewhat of the same, comparing relics and ritual objects they encountered. Of course, this is also a story of fierce interreligious competition and the appropriation, manipulation, and subversion of the symbols, rites, and icons of the religious other, to contest, refute, and reinterpret them, a theme that we have perhaps not addressed so much in this workshop. There is another theme, however, that Rashid ad-Din's anecdote, I think, has in common with the workshop papers. That is the tension ingrained in relic ritual objects in the monotheistic traditions between their material, palpable, empirical, sensory, corporeal, and applicable and worldly qualities, and the transcendentalist, righteous, incorporeal, and abstract registers that they are meant to communicate and convey and inculcate in those who come into contact with them. In the story above, Rashid, the Persian vizier tries to locate the Buddhist remains in relation to the Islamic transcendentalists thereafter, presenting them as a divine warning rather than a blessing. He also seeks to satisfy the king's desire for a palpable worldly proof, an actual kind of immanentist proof of Islam's superiority in a miraculous kind of fashion. Our saints, our Sufi sheikhs, the Prophet Abraham, do not burn at all if you put them in the fire, he tells us. So as Alan Straffen writes in his recent book, Unearthly Kings, relics speak in a transcendentalist register, to be sure. They may be memento mori. They can concretize and immortalize the moral authority of their original persons. But they also speak to the desire for embodied and tangible sacrality. And as such, they are always liable to be apprehended as condensations of human power. We've seen this, I think, throughout the conference in many ways, as ritual objects and relics seek both to convey certain religious righteous sensibilities and habitus, but are also imbued in this immanentist domain of ritual efficacy and world results. So that's it. Those are my kind of final comments. I hope that was kind of wrapped up a little bit the conference. Thank you very much. Yeah, we can go on speaking about lights and things. And lamps and oh, I'm still sharing, of course, yeah. Okay. So, by the way, the conference has been recorded, so and it will be uploaded to the Center for the Study of Religious Conversion, their YouTube site. So I'll send a link with all the details, right, Daniela? It will go for some kind of editing as well, so it won't be like just as is. It won't be with all the kind of the recesses and stuff and things in the middle.
Great.
Thank you everyone for joining and for participating and contributing. It was a really great 4 days. It really felt like a conference, you know, with all the ups and downs, and those quiet moments, and you know, it did feel very real. And the trips, yeah.
Good, you guys did a wonderful job. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Daniela. Thank you, Jonathan. Thank you.
Tremendously rich. Thank you.
Many, many, many thanks from Vienna.
Thank you.
This was really wonderful. Really amazing. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, I would just like to propose, I hope that you guys can entertain a round 2, because this was probably the, after like a heavy semester, this was actually a delight at the end of May, you know, a conference. It was just intellectually stimulating, so much information, so many, I love to talk about objects and rituals, and I think coming at it from so many angles. And I just taught a class on the Crusades, and all of the Crusader panels, I was like, I wish I had included this. I wish I had included this in the course. And so thank you, everybody. Thank you, Daniela and Yoni, for the invitation. And thank you for this whole, thank you so much. I'm greatly appreciative.
No one wants to go.
Yeah, I'll have to like end it. I can just, you know.
Right.
You have a bad weekend.
Nobody has children to take care of or something.
No one wants to be the first to click on that.
The end. I can just end meeting for all if you.
Someone has to volunteer here.
Right. You'll have to do it.
So
see you all soon, I hope.
Inshallah, yeah.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you.